They've made our Thanksgivings miserable. They've made our neighborhood parties uncomfortable. And it's all because they're trying to convince us that the people who vote differently than us are in some way horrific or terrifying or evil, because that's the way to motivate people. I'm placing a bet, a very clear bet in this race. That is, there are enough people who are sick of this that we can still get people out to vote, as well as actually inspiring people to go vote for positive reasons rather than just motivating them with misery.
I've been talking for years about how this paradigm of left versus right doesn't capture what's going on in America. It's much more insiders versus outsiders, big shots versus ordinary people. And you seem very tuned in to this dynamic. So, but what does this look like on the ground?
Now that I'm running for governor, we're getting great turnout everywhere we go, and it is a fun way to bring people together. We would oftentimes talk about election reform even through the official office town halls, because people were talking about accountability. We're talking about the situations where government is doing stuff that's just absolutely inexcusable and indefensible. And inevitably, somebody would raise their hand and say, why do they do that? Why do they think they can get away with it? My answer always would be, because we have a broken two-party system where they think that they're effectively entitled to their reelection because they have the right party affiliation for the district that they're elected from.
How unpolitician-like.
Yeah, honestly, I have always been so disgusted by politics. I feel like it is a weird career choice, but I love it. I love it for what it should be.
Yeah.
You know,
potential.
Hiring. Yeah, and it should be people coming together. And so oftentimes my bottom line is sort of like, well, what would the politician, the standard politician in my head do in this situation? And then I just go and do something close to the opposite.
There you go. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join this conversation. I'm really excited to introduce all of you to Rob Sand. Rob is a longtime friend of Open Primaries and has built a real presence in Iowa. He was both an assistant attorney general in Iowa. He is currently the state auditor. He was elected first in 2018 and reelected in 2022. Was the only Democrat reelected statewide. He's been an incredibly dynamic and effective state auditor, and now he is running for governor. And welcome, Rob. Great to have you.
Thank you, John. I'm excited to be here. Normally when I'm talking about open primaries, it's at a public town hall where there might be a couple of people who have heard of it, and here we are. Everybody knows what we're talking about today.
Right. We'll get to that. I want to talk to you about open primaries in Iowa and around the country. But first, I have to confess, I'd never heard of a state auditor. They don't have one in New York, where I lived for 30 years. I did a little research. Turns out that half the states have something called a state auditor. And, you know, I'm not like, I'm not a math guy. I'm not an accountant guy. But I was fascinated learning about the role you've played, not just in the job itself, but in going out to every county in Iowa and organizing these town halls to talk about kind of these issues of accountability in Iowa. So before we get into your gubernatorial campaign, talk a little bit about being the state auditor and what you've done.
Yeah. It's pretty straightforward. In Iowa, it's effectively the role of the taxpayer's watchdog. So every state has somebody that fills this role, even if they don't have this title. New York, you've got your comptroller, I think would be the closest comparison. In fact, there's a national organization that's called the National Association of State Auditors, Comptrollers, and Treasurers.
Got it.
And
okay.
So that's one of those things that even if it isn't an auditor, they usually have somebody doing it. And the job is pretty straightforward. We audit public entities. We do not audit taxpayers. We audit tax spenders. So we are the watchdog. We also investigate public corruption. Those investigations then can get used in court. And then in my first term, we also started a government efficiency program. The government efficiency program is pretty straightforward. We have a list of about 10 ways you can, or 10 pages, I should say, of ways that you can save money as a city, a county, or a school district We send it out every year, ask people to tell us what they're doing and what they're not, send it back in. That means they are automatically entered into our pie contest every year. We go out and we award the best performers as a way to kind of lift up the people who were doing good. And then hopefully they come back the next year and they've implemented another practice or two. So that's the nature of the office. We uncovered a record amount of misspent money in my first term, which resulted in the legislature and the governor passing a law so that it is legal for state agencies to hide waste and abuse from the auditor's office. It's like the most politician response possible to somebody doing their job. Hey, let's make it harder for him to do
Yeah,
his job. He's too serious about this.
that's unbelievable. So when you organize these town halls, and I read about this. So you bring together people, you go to every county in the 99 counties in Iowa, and you ask people, you say, who's a Democrat, who's a Republican, who's an independent? Let's all sing America the Beautiful together.
Yes.
And then do you talk about that 2023 rule? Like
Oh
what,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and what
And
do
that's
people say?
yeah. So to be clear, I've done about 760 town halls. When I have done them through the official office, making an official appearance in every county as state auditor, um, we haven't done the singing piece normally because the group isn't quite big enough for it to be not awkward. Um,
Okay, got
no,
it.
there's
Yeah,
only so many people that want to come to a town hall for a state auditor.
got
But
it.
now that I'm running for governor, we're getting great turnout everywhere we go, and it is a fun way to bring people together. We would oftentimes talk about election reform, even through the official office town halls, because people were talking about accountability. We're talking about the situations where government is doing stuff that's just absolutely inexcusable and indefensible. And inevitably, somebody would raise their hand and say, why do they do that? Why do they think they can get away with it? And my answer always would be because we have a broken two-party system where they think that they're effectively entitled to their reelection because they have the right party affiliation for the district that they're elected from. We don't have accountability. So
Right.
we've talked about this issue prior. It's been during this year, while running for governor, that we've been identifying our party affiliations and singing together. That to me is just and I say, this is a way to push back against the people who want us to be divided, which are, frankly, it's the people in both parties. They've made our Thanksgivings miserable. They've made our neighborhood parties uncomfortable. And it's all because they're trying to convince us that the people who vote differently than us are in some way horrific or terrifying or evil, because that's the way to motivate people. I'm placing a bet, a very clear bet in this race. That is, there are enough people who are sick of this that we can still get people out to vote, as well as actually inspiring people to go vote for positive reasons rather than just motivating them with misery.
That's great. That's very refreshing to hear. I know when you became the auditor, you somewhat famously appointed uh, a Republican and an independent to be on your kind of, your kitchen cabinet, your
Yeah,
leadership team. Do you
yeah,
now you're running for governor? Can you bring that same approach from the auditor's office into the governor's mansion?
yeah. I think absolutely, and I think too. It's not just that they were an independent and a Republican; they'd actually made campaign contributions to my opponent.
Right.
That to me, I thought they were the most qualified people for the position. I like to joke that you know, they didn't know me very well. If only they had known me, they wouldn't have been active on behalf of my opponent. but but I think that most people, when I talk about this at town halls, I talk about the distinction between politics and public service, because in politics, people who love politics and the pursuit of power, they look at me doing that and they're like, Sand, you dummy, you're doing it wrong. You're supposed to punish the people who oppose you. That's how you get people to be scared of you. That's how you get what you want. And effectively, I have two replies to that. Number one, look at my face. No one's ever going to be scared of me anyways, right? I'm I'm uh I'm 43. I promise you I'm 43. I know I look like I'm 23. Um, but I'm not going to try to push people to feel something that they're not going to fear when they look at me anyways. But the bigger answer, the more serious answer is I don't, I want to do public service. Like my politics is oriented around public service, which involves saying to people who disagreed with you, hey, come on board. You're a broken clock, but you're right twice a day. And every once in a while, I'm almost wrong slightly. And I want you to be there to tell me when I'm wrong so that I can get it right.
How unpolitician like.
Yeah, honestly, I have always been so disgusted by politics. I feel like it is a weird career choice, but I love
Yeah.
it. I love it for what it should be.
Yeah.
You
It's
know, it should
potential.
be
Yeah.
inspiring. Yeah, and it should be people coming together. And so oftentimes my bottom line is sort of like, well, what would the politician, the standard politician in my head do in this situation? And then I just go and do something close to the opposite.
There you go. I want to show a clip. You did this interview a couple weeks ago that I was really interested to watch. So we have a small clip from this. Just before we show it, though, if you have a question for Rob, just go to the chat, type in your name and state, and a one-sentence summary of what you want to ask, and we'll get you in the queue. We're going to open up Q&A in about 15, 20 minutes.
Politicians want people to think like, okay, I'm an Iowan, I'm an American, I'm a Republican, because it makes it that much more difficult to pull them away from just voting for any Republican, any person with an R next to their name when they get to the ballot box, because that's who they are. And so how has that kind of manifested itself in your conversations with voters?
I always go back to this. People say, oh, how did Iowa change after going for Barack Obama twice to go for Donald Trump 3 times? Iowa didn't change. Those two guys have one important thing in common. They're both people who challenged their party's orthodoxy and said that they were going to do politics differently. And that resonates with a lot of Iowans. We actually have a pretty proud tradition in Iowa, even going back past that, with government reform things where we have said we don't like politics as usual. And so when I look at that, when I'm talking to Iowans, we're seeing people come out of the woodwork saying, we like Rob Sands' campaign for governor. I was walking around in a mall and had a guy who had never voted in his life. He's 28 years old. He said, I'm going to register to vote for you because I believe in the message that we should be bigger than Democrats versus Republicans, which is the heart of this campaign. I mean, if we've got a slogan, it's not redder or bluer, but better and truer.
Saw that. I've been talking for years about how this paradigm of left versus right doesn't capture what's going on in America. It's much more insiders versus outsiders, big shots versus ordinary people. And you seem very tuned in to this dynamic. So particularly with that, I love that Iowans didn't change. They voted for Obama to bring change. They voted for Trump to bring change. And you can leave aside whether they did or not. But what does this look like on the ground in Iowa? What are voters saying to you? How are they expressing that concern, that politic?
A really good example of this is, so we just had a special election in Northwest Iowa in Woodbury County. It's a Sioux City is there, so it's a big city by Iowa standards. And the Democrat won the election, and it moved 20 points from where it had been in the November election, which actually that is the norm. We have had 4 special elections in Iowa this year. Every single one of them has swung 20 points towards the Democrat. So they're all among the biggest swings in the country. That aside, the Republican Party of the state of Iowa kind of dumped on the local folks. And they said, the local folks just didn't work very hard. And a county supervisor who is a Republican, who is from Correctionville, a teeny tiny town very far from Sioux County, put a 17-minute video up on Facebook. He said, the reason that we lost this election is because the policy coming out of Des Moines, whether you're a Democrat, independent, or a Republican, has been terrible. They never should have gutted the auditor's office, which, to go back to your early question, we talk about that at every single town hall, right? We have the 49th ranked economy in the country. We are #1 for cancer growth, and the legislature is figuring out how to hide the money they're going to misspend from the state auditor's office, right?
Wow.
So this guy goes off. He's like, Sand, whatever you think of him, he was duly elected by the people of the state of Iowa. He was doing the job. Democrats, independents, and Republicans voted for him. And yet the legislature went in and took away his power to find misspent money. And then he said, now Sand's running for governor. He's a Democrat, but he's basically an independent. And I think he's going to win in a landslide. And this is someone, John, that I had never met before. But he understood. He heard the way I talk about my approach to politics. He understood it. He could tell that I was telling the truth about how I felt about the system. And he went out there and he stood up for it. And if you watch this video, he's not disappointed by this. He's not saying it like, oh no, Sam's going to win. He's like, maybe that's for the best. We also had a guy who wrote an op-ed. We didn't know it was coming. It was in the Marshalltown newspaper. Marshalltown's a mid-sized city in Iowa. It just appeared two months ago, maybe. And he said, here's a bunch of things I believe. I must be a Republican, right? Here's another bunch of things I believe. I must be a Democrat, right? I'm so sick of pretending that there's only two ways to think. This whole system is broken. It's embarrassment to our country. I'm ready to ride off into the sunset. But Sand's campaign for governor really is addressing these issues and talking about them in a way that I've never heard a candidate talk about them before. And I'm really excited about that. And John, the guy that wrote that op-ed literally has been in Kim Reynolds, our current Republican governor, has been in her cabinet.
Wow.
Yeah. And he was recommended for that cabinet position by United States Senator Joni Ernst. And so I like to say we're getting people who have never even touched the political system, have never even voted. And then we're getting people who were literally in the room when it happened. And they're both looking at what we're talking about in this campaign and going, just yes. Sometimes they only need to hear it one time. It's just like, yeah, that's right. That's my problem with this whole thing is everyone's out there just pretending, oh, my side's better. Oh, my side will solve all the problems. The other side is terrible. 80% of people don't believe that.
Yeah. It is like 80, 85, 90%, somewhere in there. There's been I don't know what you call it, a debate, a conversation at the national level about the Democratic Party. And, you have Rahm Emanuel saying the future of the Democratic Party is to recruit independent candidates. He actually said that. Candidates that are independent, that are willing to go up against the orthodoxy. You've got Jim Carville, who's like, look, we don't have to do much. Things will swing back to us. We just have to focus on the economy and get a little bit away from woke. Then you have Ezra Klein, like, no, we need to focus on abundance. Like, do you pay attention to these Democratic debates? Are they present in Iowa? What do you think about them?
They're present in Iowa. I don't pay that much attention. I think about the Serenity Prayer a lot. I can control the things that will help me get reelected. All the other stuff out there is sort of noise. And I see it sort of the way I might see a reflection on the surface of the water, but I'm not paying much attention to it. I have one very, very big job in front of me, and that's really where I put my time. And my attitude on this stuff is, what do they say? Success has a million parents and failure is an orphan.
Right.
I'm sure that if we end up being successful in this race, there'll be lots of people who say, yeah, he was doing what we said to do. I'm doing what is the right thing to do. And it much more closely aligns with open primaries and organizations that are pushing to sort of end the duopoly. One of the lines that typically gets a lot of applause and at my town halls is that the Democratic and the Republican parties don't solve enough problems to deserve their shared monopoly on our choices. And people are like, yep, and they haven't heard a candidate say that before.
Do you get pushback on that from within the Democratic Party? Are there some people in your own party that are saying, hey, you got to play on Team Blue. You got to be a little more of a loyal soldier?
Yes, I do. And you know what? It's just like, I am who I am, as Popeye would say. I'm not going to pretend. I've never understood the folks who say I'm a proud and then fill in your party. Like, to me, I believe in what I believe because I think it's the right thing to believe, mostly because of my faith, maybe because of the way I was raised, maybe because I've spent time trying to figure out like what the facts are, what the truth is on that issue. A party is a political party. It's probably a third of the people in the state. They probably have a lot of different views. I was raised by my parents at the time when I was growing up were independent voters. I registered as an independent voter when I first registered to vote. I actually say that in all of my town halls. We have closed primaries in Iowa. You can change your registration if you walk in, but right now in the state of Iowa, independent voters are disenfranchised. You're not allowed to participate, which I always talk about that. And I say that's un-American. We celebrate Independence Day in July, but that's after in June, we tell independent voters, sorry, you're less equal than the rest of us, like animals. It's ridiculous.
Let's talk about open primaries because you've been, we've known you for years. This is not an issue you've just started talking about to get some votes. This is, I know it's a passion of yours. What do you see? Do you see opportunities for this in Iowa? both among the voters, but the legislature? Like, what do you see that the open primaries? Where is it in Iowa right now?
So like I said, we have about as closed of a primary system as you can get. Yes, you can walk in and change your registration, but the truth is, to many independent voters, that feels like lying, and they will tell you that. I'm not a Democrat. I shouldn't sign up as one. Well, but you can. Well, yeah, I could also lie. I'm not going to. I don't want to. I genuinely think that this is sort of an idea, and this is a place where we should be on the forefront of this. As I mentioned in that clip, we have a history in Iowa of being ahead on election reform. We were the first, or on political reforms.
Okay.
First state in the country to create a nonpartisan redistricting commission. So the Iowa model is the model when you want to have nonpartisan redistricting and avoid gerrymandering.
And you guys did that like 25, 30 years ago, right? This is not new.
We did it in either the 60s or the 80s. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, it was a long time ago. We also were the first state in the country to create a merit-based judicial nomination system where we are making sure that the people who are ending up as judges in the state of Iowa are good lawyers who know what they're going to be doing. That was we were the first place in the country to do that. So we have this tradition in Iowa of saying politicians suck. We don't trust them. We want to have a system that pushes people more towards public service and doesn't tempt them towards being for a party. Instead, we want the represented. And we haven't done much in that regard recently, unless you count the idea of voting for Obama twice and then Trump 3 times. But I think it's time for us to take another step on state level reforms and be a leader. And I do think that if we implement this in the state of Iowa, I do think that we can get there. It's one of those things, the moral hazard always arises when you're talking about trying to get a legislature to pass campaign finance reform. That's the perfect example, because it's like, well, why would I, who's in the system and I have the power, why would I pass a reform that's going to give my opponent the ability to raise more money? I don't think that applies to open primaries. And what I would like to follow, my ideal system that I talk about is open primary, send the top 4 to the general election, and then use approval voting rather than ranked choice. It's much simpler. But I don't think that there's a moral hazard there. If you support that as a legislator, you can go back to your district and you can say to every single independent voter, I just finally made you an equal citizen in our democracy.
Right. What about, so I know independents are 31% of the vote in Iowa. And you mentioned you registered as an independent, your parents did. Like, are you seeing like a generational divide on that question? Are more young people that come to your events and rallies more independent? What are you seeing with independent voters in Iowa right now?
I will say, I find a lot of people whose experience is like mine. They registered as an independent. They want to decide what's right or wrong based on what is right or wrong, not based on what color shirt somebody's wearing. Eventually at a certain point, and it might be, roughly 4 years later, like it was for me, it might be 40 years later, they sort of shrug and they go, well, I want to do what I can to have an impact, so I guess I'll register. And I would love to know how many people in both parties in the state of Iowa are really just registered with a party because they feel like they have to be. But I find people a lot like that. Some of them make that change relatively quickly. Others take a long time to do it. I don't know if it's so much a generational divide as more of like where is your what are your value priorities? My value priority was, well, I want to have the biggest impact that I can. So I guess if I have to pick a party to vote in a primary, I'll do that.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that about the independents saying they don't want to lie. There's increasing evidence, including a poll, a deep dive poll that Common Cause did in New York, where independents are just like, look, I don't feel comfortable just registering into an organization that I don't believe in order to vote in a publicly funded election. I won't do it, And we
you have to join a private club to exercise your right to vote. That's
right.
So un-American. It's so un-American.
That's an issue we're actually working behind the scenes. And our next virtual discussion is going to be all about this, is looking at legal efforts to get the courts to say, where does the right to vote come from? Does it come from being a citizen of this country, or does it come from membership in a private organization? Who
Yeah.
gives you the right to vote? And that's an issue we're looking to bump up.
Yeah, that's your case in Maryland.
Yeah, and
I
also in
think it's just
Florida, and
I think it's
there's a
just
whole
smart
bunch of
strategy. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
The other thing
Oh,
that I like about that here in Iowa too is we actually, because our constitution, because we're a little bit further west, we have some of those populist clauses that were in
right.
some constitutions. So we have a clause in our in our constitution that says that all political power is inherent in the people of the state
Right.
of Iowa. So our constitution actually answers that question for you.
Boy, be great if we could get a judge to say, let's take that, bring it out here, and make that the law of the land.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to open it up for questions. Again, if you want to ask a question, go into the chat, type your name and state, a one-sentence description, and then I'll call on you. And we're going to start with Mike Ang in Oregon. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, thanks a lot. This is really exciting. It's my question because of the recent discussion here. My question has to do with, do you think that this time could be right for a blue state like Oregon that has virtually a supermajority of Democrats in the legislature would be a time to really push them for open primaries, with the justification being that is really the democratic reform that is necessary, and they are in a position to do it by themselves.
Yeah, I think that we should push
Thank
every
you.
state to do this. It's a good question, Mike. Yeah, Oregon should do it. Every state should do it. And John and I were in the 2 minutes that we were chatting ahead of time, we were finishing each other's sentence talking about how whichever state you do it in, the 15 people who are really loving politics there because it works so great for them. Meanwhile, the rest of us are mired in hogwash. The 15 people, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, are going to be going, yeah, I don't know. I think this is working great for me. Look at me. Look at all the power I have. So I think you should push for it in Oregon. I think we should do it in every state. But I also expect that in states like Oregon, I mean, the nature of human nature is they're going to resist it because they feel like everything's just working wonderful for them. Even while no matter what state you live in, you're probably pretty frustrated with the results of your politics. I think you should go for it anyway.
Yes,
All right. I think we're having some problems with Mike's connectivity. We're going to go to Ann Heller in New York, who has a question about, I love this question. I'm not even going to tease it. Go ahead, Ann.
Hi, thank you, Rob. Your candidacy is super exciting. So
Thanks,
it
Ann.
sounds like you're a real proponent of good government, and so many people, when you talk about hating politicians, they equate that with, obviously you've found lots of waste and abuse, but are you finding an audience for good government?
Yes, and that's, I didn't really get into I did. I talked a little bit about our PI program, Public Innovations and Efficiencies. That's the name of our government efficiency program. And if I get into it, if I talk about it at depth, I always say that what's wonderful about this is it allows us to call the good good even while we call the bad bad. And it reminds us as we give these awards out, it reminds everybody in that county, it reminds everyone in that school district, the people that you elect matter. And they can choose to do good and important work that makes your government work better, just as the same time as they can choose not to. So I'm a big good government advocate. The problem with most of our government is not necessarily the regular workaday people driving the snowplow or administering the program. It's the politicians whose incentive is, look, there's no competition, right? I mean, I'm sure a lot of the people here have read The Politics Industry. I have been recommending that book to people in town halls across the state of Iowa for 4 years, right? I mean, it's a duopoly. You don't really have to innovate. You don't have to offer a better system. You don't have to offer a better product. All you got to do is convince people that their only other choice is garbage. And so politicians don't have to do the hard work of looking at a program that's not working very well and going, man, what are we going to do to fix this? They don't have to. They can just get reelected by being like, hey, this person over here, they're the scum of the earth, and they're out to destroy your way of life. And this is what Democrats will do in state like Oregon. It's what Republicans will do in states like Iowa. And then that way you can keep your job and keep doing what you're doing and continue to feel important, like you have a position of power, even if you're not actually solving any problems for anybody.
Yeah, it's the old bait and switch.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna go to Jim Resser in Ohio, but here's a little hitch. Jim has laryngitis. So he's asked me to ask you several questions. All right. So I'm now Jim Resser from Ohio. Jim, just wave for a minute before I read your question so Rob can say hello to you. Are you there?
Jim.
All right. So here's Jim's question. Let's say that all 50 states had open primaries, term limits, ranked choice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What makes you think that the newly elected officials at all levels might not be just as divisive or corrupt? And do you believe in states' rights? And if so, how do we survive as a nation with 50 sets of laws?
Well, I do believe in states' rights and how you run these. I genuinely believe the way to reform is through the states on this. You're not going to get this to go through DC. It's going to be not easy doing it in most states. But if you do it, here's my thing. To make Washington actually work again, to make Washington actually feel like we are the United States of America, you don't have to do this in 50 states. You don't have to do it in 25 states. You don't have to do it in 10 states. You got to do it in 3 to 6 states like Iowa, where you have a pretty wide bell curve in terms of your distribution of voters. And like John was saying, we're about 30% Democrat, about 30% independent, about 40% Republican. That's a pretty even bell curve distribution. If you do this in 3 to 6 states, you then are going to have 6 to 12 US senators who are actually accountable to their entire state. And if that state is like a pretty reasonable state in terms of its politics, that's going to go a long way towards making Washington, D.C. work again. That to me is the way. Now, there's a piece of this question. Why do I think they'll behave better? Because this is exactly why I believe in markets and I believe in capitalism. You align someone's cynical interest, the invisible hand, along with what's actually good for everybody. And I talk about this at every town hall that I go to. We say in voting 1.0 with the system that we have now, oh, it's me versus John Updike. All I got to do is convince you that John's a terrible human being and I get reelected. But let's say we're in a situation where we have an open primary, the top 4 go to the general, and then we do approval voting. Well, John Updike's going to have a whole lot of people who really like him. They might like him because they like his experience. They might know him. They might like the way he talks. My incentive, if I'm a deeply cynical politician, is to get as many of his voters to also think that I'm okay, because whatever my maximum is, maybe my maximum is that 50% of the people who like John Updike will also give me an approval vote. But if I'm a jerk to him, if I lie about him, if I exaggerate the impact of his positions, then I'm going to get closer to 0% of his supporters to give me an approval vote. And so the whole idea here is it actually incentivizes cooperation. Now, politicians are human beings. Some of them are smarter. Some of them are not smarter. Some will take a while to figure this out, right?
Right.
They will continue to behave poorly because they're just accustomed to that set of incentives, but people will figure this out. And once they figure it out, I think that politics can actually be the sort of virtuous cycle that we like to imagine it to be, where we have cordial debates, where people say, my opponent and I disagree on this, but I still think that he's a decent human being, where we can see that moment of John McCain taking the mic away from the woman over and over and over again across this country in every single election cycle, rather than having someone demonizing their opponent with a phony rumor, right? And they would have a reason to do that, because then in that situation, Barack Obama's supporters will go, John McCain, good guy, defended my guy, I like him. And some of them will like him enough to go, I'm okay if he wins too, that'd be fine.
Right. Just to chime in here for a minute, because I think it's such a great question of like, what's the consequences of reforming the system? I totally agree with you that it will change the behavior of most politicians. I mean, of course, there'll be a few idiots that, but one of the things we've learned is how much of an impact it has on voters. Because one of the consequences of a closed system, and we know this both anecdotally and through research, is in a closed system, voters that are registered with Team Blue or Team Red in order to vote, they only hear from candidates from within that party. And you put that in 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, and 10 years down the road,
Interesting.
you end up with voters that have they've been sequestered.
Yeah.
They've been isolated. So they might be a staunch conservative, but staunch conservatives in open states hear from Democrats and liberals and progressives. They might reject it, but they hear it.
Yep.
And that's so important because as voters, if we get locked in.
That's right. Even the exposure to someone else's idea, if it's framed in an effective way, helps us understand where they are coming from and believe that they are a human being with dignity that deserves respect. Even if we're like, well, I'm not going to vote for him. I think that's a terrible idea. But, he seems like a guy who comes by it genuinely,
Well, that's part of the responsibility.
I've never even thought about that before. That's a great benefit too.
It benefits candidates and it benefits voters. And frankly, it makes it more challenging for us as voters because we can't just live in our ecosystems. And that to me is a good thing because it's all about how do you grow as a citizen, not shrink as a citizen.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Well, Jim, I hope I did a good job of replicating that. We're going to go to Lenny Gluckenheimer in Florida, who has a question about a current debate taking place in Florida. Go ahead, Lenny.
Oh, I see him, but I can see his screen, but it looks like he might not be there right now.
Okay, we'll come back to Lenny. Lenny, just give me a holler when you're back online. Let's go to Greg Millard. I don't know what state, has a question about kind of the relationship between closed primaries and division. Go ahead, Greg.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I'm from California, and I wrote Rod instead of Rob, but an excellent conversation. My concern has been for some time trying to determine, before I even knew about the closed primary issue, is what the cause of the division was, because going back, I'm getting on in years, but going back 30, 40 years, there wasn't the division between parties we see now.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if there's any correlation between the chronology involved in adopting closed primaries to the amount of separation we see in the country. And if we can promote this idea that that was the reason, it should act as a lever, a big one, to get rid of them.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. Do you, John or Greg, do you know the answer to that?
I don't.
It's a great question. I think that a piece of it is geographic sorting, right? So people have sorted themselves kind of into more urban areas and more rural areas, and they have become more solidified in their political views. But is that a consequence of closed primaries? What's the causation? What's the correlation? Those are great questions. I don't know the answer to it, but I can tell you this, Greg. This is what I lead with at every single town hall this year, because this is a campaign year and I'm just going straight directly into what I want to do. And my number one, when people ask me, what is your top priority? I say, ending the system of the lesser of two evils. People get, even if it's not the cause, they see inherently the correlation. I think that's common sense for most people, right? When we only have two choices, when it's a party these two parties forcing their two choices along on top of all of us, then we aren't really in control. We want to be together. We don't want so much division. We need to be in charge of that process. You just see heads nodding everywhere you look. So I do think that people get that, even if there isn't that specific factual predicate in terms of the adoption of closed primaries to support it.
I think it'd be worth investigating and making
Yeah.
a case, because if you give a logic path for people to follow, they're
Yeah.
more likely to come to your point of view. If you
They
just
are.
tell them this is the way it is, some of them will say yes and some of them will say no.
Yeah.
But you need to give them a logic path they can track along and say, oh, I remember when we used to do that, but now we're doing this. Why are we doing that?
Yeah. This
So
is
I
going to
would,
be
I would
a good question to punch into ChatGPT or Perplexity later today.
agreed.
See how good of an answer I
That's a
get.
good idea. I like that.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, let's go to James Ross in Massachusetts. A question about running for office as an independent. Go ahead, James.
Hi, Rob. I really love what you're saying. I wish you the best of luck with your campaign. My question is about, you're choosing to run as a Democrat, but you've also criticized quite a bit, the Democratic and Republican duopoly, which I think most people agree with. I'm curious to know if you've thought about the Forward Party or aligning yourself with the Forward Party, because it sounds like a lot of what you're saying, aligns with their mission and vision. And as I understand it, they don't necessarily require you to renounce your association with the Democratic Party. So
Yeah.
just kind of curious to get your thoughts about that, and maybe just other independent movements in general.
Yeah. So I'm very familiar with Andrew Yang. I was on his podcast in the last couple of months here. We're on this issue of election reform very much aligned. I just look, we all know this, the third party at this point with this structure is the spoiler. And that's what kills me about it. And I get this question all the time, James, from people in Iowa who are, oh, yeah, well, if you really mean it, you'd run as an independent. Well, no, I wouldn't, because I would be throwing away my candidacy the same way many of us feel like if we vote for an independent, we're throwing away our vote. And I know that, even if I were to do it, and no Democrat, for whatever reason, were to be angry enough to say, well, then I'll run as a Democrat. Well, the Republicans could get somebody to register as a Democrat, sign a declaration of candidacy, and then they'd collect the signatures for him, and it would still be a three-way race. And that's probably the difference maker. I'm not here to tell you that, I think that what Andrew is doing with the Forward Party is a genuine sentiment. I think he's doing what he thinks is the best to move things in this issue, this direction, to advance the issue. For me, right here in Iowa, like, look, I'm gonna run. I'm a registered Democrat because we have a two-choice system, and so I picked one of the two choices that I had. That said, they can't shut me up about how we shouldn't have a two-choice system.
That's fascinating. I mean, in some ways, from my perspective, it's great to have people pursuing creating independent alternatives, and
Yeah.
people like yourself picking a lesser of two evils and advocating for an end to that system, because it's not going to topple with just one strategy or the other. I think it's going to be lots of different strategies and tactics coming at this from lots of different angles, coming up from candidates, from the voters, from the structure, all of the above. A follow-up question to that is from Joan in Missouri, which is about fundraising as an independent Democrat. Go ahead, Joan. Joan, you still there?
She's on mute.
Joan, you got to unmute yourself.
All right. Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay,
Howdy.
I'm sorry.
Howdy,
Yeah.
neighbor.
So I've had people ask me to run as an independent and as a Democrat. And I'm doing workshops in Missouri called Town Talks Live, and it's really about bridging the political divide and bringing Democrats and Republicans together to save our democracy one conversation at a time.
Yeah.
Bottom line is I was told I had to fundraise 80 hours a week, and it's like, I don't want to do that. I want to have my conversations with people. I think that's more powerful.
Yeah.
And I don't really feel the structure for the Democratic Party in Missouri is a healthy one. It isn't any healthier than the national level. So I'm kind of sitting back and waiting until the last minute to declare, because I don't want to do all that fundraising. I want to do my workshops. I want to reach out to people. And I just want your thoughts. And actually the last person that ran against Dan Wagner said to me, you need to run as an independent Democrat. And so that's one reason I'm here. And I just want to hear your take on that situation that I have?
You know, I guess I'd say this. The fundraising piece, you know, so part of this is unique in Iowa because I'm the only Democrat presently in either statewide or federal office. This is not, by the way, a deeply red state. We have, for 3 cycles in a row, lost the closest congressional race in the country. By 6 votes, we lost a race in 2020. 2022, we lost an incumbent by 0.5%, a Democrat incumbent congresswoman. And then last cycle, we lost by 900 votes, the closest challenge for a Democratic challenger. So people in Iowa who are in my party or who vote for my party are not accustomed to a 10-year losing streak, present company excluded, right? I have won twice out of running twice. But I think people in this state are fed up and really ready for someone who they feel like can win because I've run and won twice. And I think that helps me to your point. Donors know that I can run. They know that I can win. I am a big believer that short of a handful of people, you've got to start somewhere other than U.S. Senate or governor, right? You got to let people get to know you, build a record, build some name ID, get used to the vehicle that you're driving, understand how campaigns work, that sort of thing. And so I don't know what office it is you're thinking about, but I tend to think, you know, step
No,
in.
it's the House of Representatives.
I think that's reasonable. I think that that's reasonable. You know, if you can, and I don't know, it depends on what your party affiliation is. You know, I ran as a Democrat in 18 because, again, it's basically a 2-choice system. I still felt the same way, but it's like, well, if I'm the Democrat, then it's a 2-way race, and it's better than a 3-way race with someone who, you know, leans towards the Democrats. So, and then, do you guys? The fundraising piece is always complicated. I spend a lot of time fundraising every week. I used to get breakfast usually 4 or 5 times a week, an hour with a friend. I used to get lunch 4 or 5 times a week, an hour with a friend. I don't do any of those anymore. So that's 10 hours a week that I have created. I eat my meals in 10 or 15 minutes instead of taking an hour. This is incredibly stupid. The amount of time you have to put into fundraising is incredibly stupid. And also, it is what it is. And it's how you get your message out. The truth is, there's a lot of people who are disgusted with politics and don't pay much attention. And it's hard to reach them if you aren't running ads to reach them. Some people consider them to be low information voters. I consider them to be non-masochistic voters. Why would you into politics? Politics are horrific. Tune in for a month close to election day and tune out again and enjoy your life, right? But it still means that those folks, if they're not paying a lot of attention, and they're not, because why would they? It's going to be harder to reach them if you haven't raised much. And that's maybe not what you want to hear, but I think that's the truth. You gotta raise it to get your message out there.
Okay.
All right,
I hope-
Jones,
I
we're
hope you
going to
do
be
it.
interviewing you.
However it is you want to do it, I hope you do it.
Yeah, good luck with that, Joan. That's a tough decision.
Thank you.
Any last questions? Anybody else? You want to raise your hand? We got nothing. We got. I actually have one question for you, Rob. I actually want to go back to the kind of the Obama-Trump experience in Iowa.
Yeah.
What's your take? Your personal take, and how do most Iowans talk about the kind of change Obama delivered or didn't deliver, and the kind of change Trump delivered or didn't deliver? Like what's that? Is there a conversation about that? Or what do you think about that?
Not commonly, but I will point out, and because I think this supports my main point. You know, the Democratic Party has, in the 3 elections against Trump, has nominated 3 of the most consummate insiders you possibly could nominate: Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris. Right? And there were a lot of people in Iowa. I remember the conversation in 16. A lot of people would say, well, if it's not Bernie, then I'm for Trump. Now, some people would be confused by that. I never was. I understood that inherently. You want
Right.
someone who can shake it up. You don't think that our politics, you think that our country deserves better than our politics. And these are two guys who are authentically who they are, and they're both going to do things very differently. That was never confusing to me. There's not a lot of a conversation with it. I think at the end of the day, it's just frustration. You know, a lot of people who voted for Obama because they thought he was young and he wasn't too connected in DC. He was new on the scene. They gave him a lot of hope. He was an outsider. He was different. And then many of them voted for him in 12, but some of them didn't because they were disappointed with what was happening. You know, I think that disappointment again, and I think we're seeing that here too with approval ratings now for Trump in Iowa. Our political system is broken. I mean, when you're voting for people in both parties who you feel are different and you're still getting the same results as you would from someone who wasn't different, it's not that I think that it's the system that's broken.
Yeah.
I think this conversation is a ripe conversation to be having in a state that literally had twice as many Obama-Trump swing counties as any other state in the country.
Really?
We had 33. Wisconsin had the next most. I think they had 20. And in that area, by the way, it's northeast Iowa, southwest Wisconsin, southeast Minnesota. That's the driftless area. That's my home turf. That's where I grew up. To me, I think that my take on this is accurate because this is the water I drank and the air I breathed for 18 years when I was growing up in Decorah.
It's fascinating because there's so little national conversation about that, about those counties, about that
Yeah.
sentiment, about, and I bet that when you scratch the surface, it might be that Iowa and southern Minnesota are the top, but that tens of millions of Americans that resonates with. They're kind of, hey, I'm trying this party, I'm going to try that party. You know, and we crunch the numbers, Rob. This won't surprise you, but every week, 10,000 Americans go to the trouble of walking down to the DMV or the post office and changing their voter registration from D or R to independent.
Is that right?
Not just a mental act.
10,000 a week.
10,000 every week. We actually crunch the numbers. And people, this isn't just a mental switch. This is people who actually go and switch
That's right.
their voter
That's right.
registration.
That's right.
And I think it's connected to that swing voting
Yeah.
behavior.
My wife is one. She watched the debate with Biden, where we all learned just what shape he was in.
Right.
And I want to say that was a Friday night, but whatever it was, but the beginning of the next week, she was like, I'm not a Democrat anymore. She wasn't really a Democrat to start. She had registered as one to participate in the primary, but she was one of those people. I said, go for it. There's a piece of this to me that's also really interesting because you say it's hard to see this in the coverage. I have found the same thing. I have been profiled in the Atlantic a few years ago. I was profiled in the Wall Street Journal a month ago. In both of these situations, but particularly in the conversation with the reporter from the Atlantic, I spoke at length about changing our political system. Hours in the case of the reporter from the Atlantic, on the record. And you might get one quote in there that sort of, I'm making the point, but the whole story is
right.
Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican, which to me just totally misses the point. I mean, the headline for the Wall Street Journal piece was something like the Democrat in red America that Republicans fear most. And I was like, no, I want, please blow that up. I'm sick of Democrats. I'm sick of Republicans. Well, they have this framing, right? That they see the lens through, and that's the way they write the story. And it's easier to write the story that way because that's what they've always done.
That's what I have a question, John.
Yeah.
And Rob,
Hey, Blair.
Hey, Rob, the idea that who is the candidate that they fear? And they talked about guns and religion, but they didn't talk about why, really the why that you have in terms of this issue of open primaries and what's happening to our country. They didn't talk about that at all. I think we have to move from from what you're doing and maybe going back to both those two authors as to why. And so that's the problem, that transition as to what's happening to what we could do about it and what the solution is just does not appear in these articles. And
No.
I'm completely frustrated.
I'm hopeful. We have there's someone who's coming out before our town halls are over who's going to travel to a few with me. And I'm hopeful that that piece will hit it more because he's going to hear it. It is literally how I open every single town hall. There's one word to describe our political system: broken. You know, neither the Democratic or the Republican Party solve enough problems to deserve a monopoly on our choices. Politicians have figured out all they have to do really at the end of the day is demonize their opponent to get reelected because solving problems is hard and complicated, but they don't have to do it anymore. And everybody nods their head. And so my hope is that when we have someone who's there on the road with me for the day, you know, it'll be harder for them to not write about that because it'll be hitting them in the face a few times during the day.
That's great. And that's what we got to do. We got to hit them in the face.
Yeah, you do. So, and I'm, you know, we'll see how much patience I have, how much longer my patience lasts for more of these stories that are just like, because, you know, it's just like, oh, here's a Democrat. He's from a small town and he hunts and he fishes and he goes to church every Sunday. And I'm like, yeah, those are all things I've done my whole life. Let's talk about my views. That's what's more interesting to people.
Right. Yeah, it is the case that everything gets sandwiched into the blue versus red narrative. And the more we can punch that and expose that, the better. We're out of time. Rob, tell people how they can help.
Hey, robsand.com. Sign up to volunteer. Donate, please. In Iowa, we have no campaign contribution limits. We will take what we can get. You heard what I want. I want to end the system of the lesser of two evils. I think we've got a real shot to do it in a state that traditionally likes people who want to fix politics, not just practice politics. Would love to have your support. Again, it's just robsand.com to donate or to sign up to volunteer if you want a phone bank like Joan.
Yeah, I would just add to that too. I think almost everybody in America knows people in Iowa. It's one of those states a lot of people came from. Give some thought to the 2, 5, 10 people, college classmates, relatives, old colleagues that you can call and email. And it's a small enough state where that kind of personal outreach saying this is a candidate you should get behind can make a big difference.
Yeah.
Rob, thank you. Really, this has been a great discussion. Our next month's discussion is going to be a look at some of the legal challenges. We have a group of attorneys coming on to talk about Florida and Maryland and Pennsylvania and other states where we're challenging the whole closed primary construct. But Rob, thank you. Good luck with the campaign, and we'll stay in close touch. Thank you, everyone.
Sounds great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks
Bye.
for your questions. This was fun. Thanks for supporting the organization.